want to tell you about something that took me 78 years to fully understand. It's about survival, shame, and the kind of strength that nobody celebrates. The strength it takes just to wake up another day when your body aches and your spirit is broken. This isn't an easy story to hear, and it wasn't easy to live. But maybe, just maybe, someone needs to hear it. My name is Virginia Martinez. Most people call me Ginny. I'm sitting here today in a room full of women who understand what it means to live with fear so constant it becomes normal, so familiar, it feels like home. Behind me there's a banner on the wall that says, "You are not alone." For 40 years I didn't believe those words could ever apply to me. I was born in 1947 in a small Mexican-American community in Southern California. My parents were immigrants who worked themselves to exhaustion in the agricultural fields, their hands permanently stained with dirt and their backs bent from years of labour. They taught me to be obedient, to respect authority, to understand that a woman's place was beside her husband no matter what. They died when I was 17. My father from a heart attack in the fields, my mother from grief 6 months later. At 18, I was alone in the world, working as a seamstress in a garment factory, living in a tiny room I could barely afford. That's when I met Ricardo Martinez. He was 26, impossibly handsome with jet black hair slicked back with pomade and a smile that could light up a room. He worked as a mechanic and drove a pristine 1963 Chevrolet Impala that he polished every Sunday. When he asked me to dance at a community celebration, I felt like the luckiest girl alive. He was charming, attentive, and he made me feel safe in a world where I'd been drifting, rootless and frightened. We married in 1965. I wore a simple white dress that I'd sewn myself, and we had our reception in the church basement with tamales and rice and a 3-tier cake that my neighbour had baked. Ricardo held my hand during our first dance, and I remember thinking that I would never be alone again. I thought I'd found my home. The first 3 months were beautiful. Ricardo would bring me flowers from the corner store, kiss my forehead before leaving for work, and tell me I was his queen. I cooked his favourite meals, kept our small apartment spotless, and dreamed about the children we would have. Then I burned the chicken one night. It was a Thursday in August. I remember because the heat in our apartment was suffocating, and I'd been distracted, trying to fix the broken fan. The kitchen filled with smoke, and when Ricardo came home his face changed. It was like watching a mask slip off. His eyes went cold, and before I could apologise, his hand connected with my face. The slap echoed in our tiny kitchen. I fell against the counter, my cheek burning, my ears ringing. For a moment we both just stood there, frozen in shock. Then he crumpled. He fell to his knees, wrapped his arms around my legs and sobbed. "Ginny, I'm so sorry. My God, I'm so sorry. My father used to hit my mother, and I swore I'd never be like him. Please, please forgive me. It will never happen again. I promise you, on my mother's grave, it will never happen again." I believed him. Of course I believed him. He was my husband, the man I loved, and he was crying with such genuine remorse. I helped him up, held him while he shook with tears, and told him I forgave him. It happened again 2 weeks later, then a month after that, then more frequently until I lost track of the intervals between the violence. By 1967, I was pregnant with our first child. I was ecstatic. Surely, I thought, a baby would change everything. How could a man hurt the mother of his child? How could violence exist in a home with an innocent baby? But it didn't change. If anything, Ricardo became worse. He was jealous of the attention I gave our daughter Elena. He complained that I was too tired, too focused on the baby, not attentive enough to his needs. When Elena cried at night, he would rage about the noise. When I nursed her, he would accuse me of loving her more than him. The violence became more systematic. He learned where to hit me so the bruises wouldn't show. My ribs, my back, my upper arms. He knew how to slap without leaving marks that couldn't be covered with makeup. I became an expert at concealment. Foundation for the bruises, sunglasses for the black eyes, long sleeves even in the California heat. Our second child, Carlos, was born in 1969. Then Miguel in 1972. Then Sophia in 1975. With each pregnancy, I desperately hoped that this child would be the one to transform him, to awaken the gentle man I'd married. But that man was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. People ask me now why I didn't leave. They say it as if it's simple, as if leaving was just a matter of walking out the door. But in the 1970s, in our community, divorce was a mortal sin. My priest told me that marriage was sacred, that my duty was to my husband, that I needed to pray harder and be a better wife. My neighbours whispered about women who left their husbands. They were called selfish, crazy, bad mothers. And I had nowhere to go. I had no family. I had no education beyond high school. I had 4 children who needed food, clothing, shelter. Ricardo controlled all our money. I didn't even have access to our bank account. He gave me cash for groceries and demanded the receipts and exact change. But the real reason, the reason I'm most ashamed of, was fear. Not just fear of what he'd do to me, though that was real enough. He'd told me many times that if I ever tried to leave, he would kill me. He would find me wherever I went and kill me. And I believed him. More than that, he threatened the children. "You think you can take my kids from me?" he'd say, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with alcohol. "I'll hurt them. I'll make sure you never see them again. I have friends, Ginny, friends who know people. You'll never be safe." There was something else too, something harder to explain. Between the beatings, there were good days. Days when Ricardo would be the man I married, bringing home flowers, taking the kids to the park, holding me gently at night and whispering apologies. Those moments confused me, gave me hope that maybe he was getting better, maybe the violence was ending. Psychologists have a term for this now. They call it trauma bonding, or the cycle of abuse. But in the 1970s and 80s, I didn't have those words. I just knew that I loved him and hated him in equal measure, that I was trapped in a pattern I couldn't break. The children grew up watching. I tried so hard to protect them, to hide them during his rages, but children see everything. They heard the shouting through the walls. They saw me wearing sunglasses indoors. They felt the tension that filled our house like smoke. Elena became withdrawn, hiding in her room with books. Carlos grew angry, getting into fights at school. Miguel developed anxiety so severe he couldn't sleep. Sophia, the youngest, became obsessively good, trying to be perfect to prevent the violence she thought she could control. I told myself I was staying for them, to give them a stable home, to keep the family together. But I know now that I was wrong. I was teaching them that love looked like violence, that women accepted abuse, that men had the right to hurt those they claimed to love. The worst beating happened in 1995. The children were grown by then, moved out and building their own lives. Ricardo and I were alone in the house, and I made the mistake of contradicting him during an argument about money. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember his face turning purple with rage and then his fists. He broke 3 of my ribs, ruptured my spleen, left me unconscious on our bedroom floor. Our neighbour, Mrs. Chen, heard my screams through the walls and called the police. I woke up in the hospital a day later. The doctors told me I'd almost died. The police were waiting to take my statement, and for the first time in 30 years, I thought about pressing charges. Then Ricardo showed up. He came into my hospital room carrying white roses, tears streaming down his face. He looked small, broken, genuinely devastated. "Ginny," he whispered, "I need help. Real help. I'm sick. I know I'm sick. I'll go to therapy, to anger management, whatever it takes. Please, give me one more chance." My children came too. Elena, Carlos, Miguel and Sophia, all adults now, all demanding that I leave him. "Mum, this is insane," Elena shouted, her voice echoing in the sterile hospital room. "He nearly killed you. He's going to kill you." Carlos paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. "How can you even think about going back? After everything we went through? After everything you put us through?" That phrase cut deeper than I expected. "Put you through?" I said quietly. "Yes, put us through." Sophia's voice broke. "Do you know what it was like growing up in that house? Hearing him hit you, being too scared to have friends over, having to lie to teachers about why you had bruises." "We were children, Mum," Miguel said, and there were tears on his face too. "You were supposed to protect us. You chose to stay with him. You chose him over us. I had no defense. They were right in a way, but they didn't understand the complexity, the fear, the way abuse twists your mind until you can't see a way out." I went back to Ricardo. The therapy lasted exactly 2 weeks before he stopped going. The violence resumed within a month. But something had changed. The beating had been too severe, too public. My children barely spoke to me anymore. They were distant, formal, visiting out of obligation rather than love. I could see it in their eyes. Not just anger, but something worse. Disappointment, contempt. The years passed in a grey fog. Ricardo continued to hit me, though less frequently as we both aged. I continued to endure. I had accepted that this was my life, that I would die in this house, that this was what I deserved. Then, in 2005, Ricardo had a stroke. It was massive, leaving him partially paralysed and unable to speak clearly. Suddenly, the man who had terrorised me for 40 years was helpless, dependent on me for everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. I became his caregiver, feeding him, bathing him, changing his soiled sheets, helping him to the bathroom. The hands that had hit me countless times now couldn't even hold a spoon. My children rarely visited. When they did come, the visits were brief and awkward. They would look at me caring for him with expressions I couldn't bear, not pity, but disgust. "How can you do this for him?" Carlos asked one day, watching me spoon soup into Ricardo's mouth. "After everything he did to you?" "He's my husband," I said simply. "That's not an answer, Mom. That's an excuse." Elena was more direct. "You chose him. Again and again you chose him over us, over yourself, over any kind of dignity or self-respect. I love you, but I don't understand you. I don't think I ever will." Those words haunted me. They hurt worse than any physical blow Ricardo had ever delivered. My children loved me, but they didn't respect me. They saw me as weak, as complicit in my own abuse, as someone who had betrayed them by staying. Ricardo died in 2015. Heart failure. I held his hand as he went, and I felt nothing. Not grief, not relief, just a vast emptiness. I was free. After 50 years of marriage, 40 years of abuse, I was finally free. And I was utterly alone. The months after his death were the darkest of my life. My children remained distant. They called occasionally, visited on holidays, but there was a wall between us that neither side knew how to breach. The house felt enormous and empty. I would go days without speaking to anyone. I fell into a deep depression. I barely ate. I rarely left the house. I would sit in my living room, looking at old photographs, wondering where my life had gone, wondering if I'd made the right choices, knowing I hadn't. The shame consumed me. Not shame for being abused. I understood now that wasn't my fault. But shame for staying. Shame for the example I'd set for my children. Shame for normalizing violence in our home. Shame for being too weak, too afraid, too broken to leave. I thought about suicide, not actively planning it, but the idea floated through my mind like a dark cloud. What was the point of continuing? I had survived, yes, but for what? Then 2 years ago, something unexpected happened. A social worker named Maria knocked on my door. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She told me about a new support group for domestic violence survivors, held at a community centre downtown. "I'm too old for that," I told her. "There's no age limit on healing," she said, "and there are other women like you, Mrs. Martinez. Women who stayed for years, who feel the same shame, who need to know they're not alone." I didn't want to go. But the loneliness was crushing, and loneliness will drive you to do things you wouldn't otherwise do. The first meeting, I sat in the back and didn't speak. There were 12 women in the room, ranging from their 20s to their 70s. They shared stories that sounded painfully familiar. The escalation, the apologies, the fear, the isolation. A woman named Patricia, who was 65, talked about her 42-year marriage to an abusive husband. "My children blame me," she said, crying. "They ask why I didn't leave, and I don't know how to make them understand." I started crying too. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I went back the next week, and the week after that. Slowly, I began to share my own story. At first, just fragments. He hit me for the first time after 3 months. I had 4 children. He died 10 years ago, and I still feel trapped. The women didn't judge me. They understood in a way my children couldn't. They knew about the fear, the economic dependence, the way abuse destroys your sense of self until you believe you don't deserve better. They knew about trauma bonding, about the cycle of abuse, about how leaving can be the most dangerous time. We talked about all the reasons we stayed. Some stayed because of religion, some because they had no money, some because they were isolated from family and friends, some because their partners threatened to kill them, to take their children, to destroy them. All of us carried shame. All of us wondered if we were somehow responsible, if we should have been stronger, braver, smarter. And slowly, through weeks and months of sharing, I began to understand something crucial. Staying in an abusive relationship doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Leaving requires strength, yes, but sometimes surviving, making it through another day, another year, another decade, requires a different kind of strength that nobody celebrates. I started sharing my story outside the group. First at a local high school, talking to teenagers about healthy relationships. Then at a church group. Then at community centres. I told them everything. The violence, the fear, the shame. But I also told them about the complexity of abuse, about how it's not as simple as just leave. I talked about the barriers, economic, social, emotional, psychological, that trap women in dangerous situations. Young women would come up to me afterward crying, telling me about their own situations. Some were being abused, some had mothers who were being abused. Some had left but felt guilty about it. My story helped them feel less alone, less ashamed. This became my purpose. Not redemption exactly. I don't think I'll ever fully forgive myself for the years I stayed, for what my children endured. But maybe a kind of reparation. If I could help one woman leave earlier than I did, if I could help one child understand why their mother stayed, then maybe my suffering wouldn't be meaningless. Last month I did something I'd been too afraid to do for years. I wrote letters to my children. Long, detailed letters explaining everything. Not making excuses, I was clear about that. But helping them understand the context, the complexity, the reality of what I'd experienced. I wrote about the economic dependence, the religious pressure, the social stigma of divorce in our community in the 1970s. I wrote about Ricardo's threats, about my fear for their safety. I wrote about trauma bonding, about how abuse destroys your ability to think clearly. I wrote about how I was wrong to stay, wrong to expose them to that violence, but also how I did the best I could with the tools and understanding I had at the time. I mailed the letters and waited, terrified that I'd made things worse, that they would reject me completely. Elena called 3 days later. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. "Mum," she said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I judged you without understanding. I thought you were weak, but you were surviving. You did what you had to do to survive." "I should have been stronger," I said. "For you, for your brothers and sister. I should have left." "Maybe," Elena said, "but I'm learning that it's not that simple. I've been reading about domestic violence, about trauma, about why women stay. I didn't know, Mum. I didn't understand how complex it is. I thought love was enough to make you leave, but fear is more powerful than love." We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked, for the first time in years. She asked questions I'd been too afraid to answer. I told her truths I'd been too ashamed to speak. Carlos called next, then Sophia, then Miguel. Each conversation was painful and healing in equal measure. They still felt hurt by their childhood, and I understood that. Their pain was valid. But they were beginning to understand that my pain was valid too, that I was both a victim and, in some ways, a survivor of circumstances larger than myself. We're rebuilding our relationship slowly. There's still damage to repair, still conversations to have, still hurt to process. But there's also love and understanding and a willingness to see each other as whole, complex people rather than just roles, the abused mother, the traumatized children. I'm 78 years old now. My body carries the scars of 40 years of violence, the slight irregularity in my nose from where it was broken twice, the scar near my left eye from where I hit the corner of a table, the chronic pain in my ribs that flares up when it rains. But I also carry something else, the knowledge that I survived. I don't romanticize survival. I'm not going to tell you that I'm grateful for what I went through, that it made me stronger, that everything happens for a reason. That's nonsense. What I went through was horrible, traumatic, and damaging to me and my children. But I did survive. And now, in these final years of my life, I'm trying to make that survival mean something. Through sharing my story, I've helped women leave abusive relationships earlier than I did. I've helped children understand their mother's choices with more compassion. I've advocated for better resources for domestic violence victims, shelters, legal aid, economic support, counselling. This is my redemption, though it's not about forgiveness from my children as much as I treasure their growing understanding. It's about the women I might help, the lives I might save, the suffering I might prevent. Last week, a young woman named Jessica approached me after I spoke at a community centre. She was 24, with a black eye poorly concealed by makeup. Her hands shook as she asked to talk to me privately. He says he loves me, she whispered. He says he'll change. But it keeps happening. I keep thinking about leaving, but I'm scared. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have money. And sometimes he's so good to me. Those good moments make me think maybe I'm wrong to want to leave. I held her hands and looked into her eyes. The good moments are real, I told her, but so is the violence. And the violence will get worse. I stayed for 40 years, Jessica. 40 years. Don't be me. Please don't be me. I gave her information about shelters, about legal resources, about support groups. I gave her my phone number and told her to call me any time, day or night. I couldn't save myself decades ago, but maybe I could help save her. 2 days ago, she called. She'd left. She was scared, uncertain about the future, but safe and alive. That's enough. It has to be enough. I sit here today in this support group, surrounded by women who understand what it means to survive. The banner behind me says, "You are not alone." And for the first time in my life, I believe it. Ricardo didn't get the final victory. He wanted to destroy me, to break me so completely that I'd never recover. And for a long time, it seemed like he'd succeeded. But I'm still here. I'm 78 years old. My hair is more silver than black. My body carries the evidence of decades of violence. But I'm still here. I'm speaking. I'm sharing. I'm helping. I'm rebuilding my relationship with my children. I'm learning finally to forgive myself, not for staying because that's a complicated moral question I may never fully resolve, but for being human, for being afraid, for doing the best I could in circumstances designed to make me feel powerless. If you're in an abusive relationship, know this. Leaving is hard. Unbearably, terrifyingly hard. But staying is hard too. Living with violence, raising children in fear, losing pieces of yourself year after year, that's hard too. There's no easy choice. But there are resources now that didn't exist when I was young. There are shelters, hotlines, legal protections, support groups. You don't have to do this alone. And if you're like I was, if you've already stayed for years, if you feel that crushing shame, if your children don't understand, know that you're not weak. You survived. That took strength, even if nobody recognizes it as such. Your story isn't over. Mine isn't either. At 78, I'm still writing new chapters, still finding ways to turn my pain into purpose, my suffering into service. Ricardo took 40 years of my life, but he didn't take all of it. These last years, these years of freedom, of voice, of helping others, these are mine, and that is enough. That is my story. Thank you for listening.